Good deal. Thanks again. Quick thanks to Mike and the Expium Oasis Digital team for the opportunity to participate today. We appreciate it. By way of introduction, my name is Jeff Skelly, and I am what is known at Atlassian as an enterprise advocate, which really means I'm responsible for customer-facing activity and introducing specifically Atlassian's platform known as Jira Align. And I'm going to talk a little bit and provide some context for some things we've learned about scale and a combination of both governance and agile at scale, which is certainly part and parcel to some of the commentary that Bill shared, both about our dinner last night and about the challenges, the very real challenges of scaling agile practices in large enterprises. And I'm joined here by Chad Goodgion, and Chad is, I'm going to introduce Chad because I know he won't do justice to his own background. So Chad is a very experienced agile consultant, scaling transformation leader in previous consulting engagements prior to joining what was AgileCraft. I'll talk a little about that. About 3 years ago?
About 3 years, yeah.
And then Chad came into our delivery organization and led some of the large-scale transformation activities with some of our very largest accounts adopting the now Jira Align platform. And subsequently, I talked him into joining me on the pre-sales side of the house. So Chad is now known as a solutions engineer for Atlassian, and he supports our dialogue in helping organizations evaluate our technology for fit and value. For my part, I was actually, let me get out of the way the fact that you'll see me leaning a little bit here. I've been around long enough to achieve a bit of a bad back, so it's acting up a little today, so I apologize. I'll use that to skip all the other background about my time in enterprise software, but it did lead up to my joining a firm called AgileCraft as a startup. I was the first member of the field organization in 2015, and AgileCraft was acquired in April of this year by Atlassian and renamed Jira Align. So for those of you familiar with obviously Jira and the various Atlassian product suite, we were an acquisition specifically to support the need of their large customers to scale and the challenges that they were having scaling Atlassian Jira software from the teams all the way up to the strategy of the enterprise to create, required, that's fine, visibility and alignment. So with that, as I said, very brief context, and then I'm going to hand it to Chad. He's going to talk specifically about some of the key learnings that we've achieved in working with large enterprise customers, about how to try and achieve scale. And then he's going to delve into some product overview for you at some level of depth. And because this is intended to be interactive, I would encourage questions and certainly welcome the chance to dive a little more deeply into any of the key areas that we're showing you or talking through. It's not a surprise that organizations are investing very, very heavily in scaling initiatives to try and improve their and increase the velocity of value delivery to their clients. And certainly, there is no question that from a development practice, Agile, Lean Agile has won the day. And organizations now are trying to say, how do I apply those same principles of small, largely self-managed teams to deliver value more rapidly across teams of teams and portfolios or release trains or whatever you may call, those larger items, and then tie that very directly to the key objectives and strategies of the business. So those investments in digital and agile transformation for all the reasons that folks well understand that are driving enterprise today are occurring very rapidly and at great scale and cost and effort. However, they're very challenging, and for a lot of the reasons that Bill spoke about in a more technical way, from a developer perspective, they're very challenging for enterprises to achieve those desired outcomes. And by the same token, the ability to become a more agile enterprise, and I know some of these are buzzwords that get tossed around a lot now, but they really are about the ability of large enterprises to be able to shift and adjust to market priorities and opportunities and competitive threats, and do so very, very quickly. And so we call that enterprise agility, and obviously it's becoming more and more necessary. Folks have probably seen this, the commentary on Mark Andreessen saying, software is eating the world, and I think it goes without saying that the impact of software on the competitive capability of any large enterprise today is really foundational and probably the key differentiator for the ability to maintain market position or grow market position. And it's interesting, the chart on the right, when you look at it, this is the time on the Fortune 500 list, and it used to be about 55 years, and it's now come down to about 15 years. So the likelihood that organizations maintain their position globally in the competitive marketplace is very directly tied, as you folks and your backgrounds and expertise clearly recognize, to their ability to deliver technology and digitally interact with their customers and partners. And so what needs to change if we're trying to do this at scale? How do we take those practices of exceptional technical teams adopting Agile and delivering much more frequently, and how do we scale that up to the enterprise? And how do we achieve those sorts of aspirational goals that we talked about in terms of competitiveness and improved quality and also improved productivity and employee morale, really being connected to what's being delivered by your organization. And so obviously there's three major vectors there. There's the culture of who we are organizationally. There's certainly the process of how we work, and you folks probably hear a great deal today about transforming the way we work or changing the way we work across the enterprise. And easy comments to make, really difficult to implement, and then again scale across the organization. And then of course there's the foundational aspects of if this is digital or agile transformations that we're talking about, then we're also talking about what technologies are being used. We, us Agile Crafters, having been acquired, as I said, recently by Atlassian, we're incredibly fortunate at the opportunity that we have given Atlassian's market footprint and adoption amongst technical teams, right? So you may be aware that Atlassian at this point has about 140,000 customers and headed towards almost 20 million users if you combine Jira and Confluence adoption. So the opportunity for the Jira Align team to help support that scale in large enterprises is amazing, as is the need and the challenge that organizations face to really get to that level. So when we talk enterprise agility, we really talk about three critical variables in our dialogue with large enterprises. The first is the same that typically drives the notion of agile adoption by technical teams in general, and that's more predictable delivery, the opportunity to really understand for both the business and the technology teams, what can be delivered, what is the volume of value delivery that can be achieved. And I'm not just talking about stories and the ability of teams to complete stories. I'm talking about that notion of predictability above the teams, so that if I have a team of teams that's product specific to my mobile program, by way of example, I can look above those teams and start to see, well, how much can the mobile program deliver, maybe on a quarter-by-quarter basis, and what's the relationship of that to various programs rolling up to my digital portfolio, by way of example. So we talk about predictable delivery in that way. More and more, when Chad and I are communicating with our enterprise customers, we're really focused on, okay, not just what is that thing that I funded and prioritized, that initiative or whatever you call it above the typically Jira, Epic, or Story. The work broke down by the technical teams into the smaller pieces, but the relationship of that to that larger item and that prioritized list of those larger items. And those conversations tend now to be less about output in story execution and more about outcomes, right? So what is the value that I'm assigning to this thing? And organizations are working very hard to create some discipline, not just, okay, that my project got funded and we're going to ride that project into the ground regardless of, what value it delivers, but that notion of what is the expected value and can we assign it and can we hope to continuously measure it so that we can make informed decisions about whether or not investing in it, given our limited resources, remains the priority. Or given all those changes we talked about, the dynamics in the market, whether instead we should, pivot or persevere, as they say. So more focus now that I've got some value assignment to those larger items at the portfolio level becomes, how do I ensure that collaboratively my product organization innovating to deliver net new functionality that is going to drive the market, my portfolio organization, typically involved in the funding, resourcing, prioritization of those strategic initiatives, and then my development organization working to deliver high quality products and all the technical underlying work, and have that collaboration be so effective that as an enterprise I can adjust very, very quickly. So again, no longer giant projects take multiple years and may or may not deliver intended value, but the ability to adjust and therefore achieve what we call the connected enterprise with a shared ownership of those outcomes. And as Bill mentioned, honest discussion cross-functionally about whether the things that are being built remain the most important things and whether or not there are other opportunities that present significantly more value. So with that, I'll note something that I'm sure all of us are painfully aware of. The gap between being good agile technical teams and being a connected enterprise is a wide one. It is very, very challenging for enterprises to be able to plug into that middle and get from those technical teams with established velocities and known delivery capacity, and then really say, okay, well, what about the entire mobile program? How much velocity does it have and delivery capacity? And of those things that the mobile program is building, did that laundry list we reviewed or funded at the outset remain, again, the most important? And I think I'll hand it off to Chad with this understanding as well, something we talk with clients ad infinitum about, right? So no matter how technically proficient they are at the team execution level, very generally, most commonly, they are still doing what we would all call waterfall prioritization, portfolio planning practices and funding practices. Executives at the start of the year try and identify again, and technical teams try and make sure there's visibility to how much capacity really exists. And executives are off with large buckets of money assigned to fairly undefined things that they think are going to take some period of time. And then while agile teams are working on, story point velocity, executives are saying, well, how many agile teams do I have? And, what if I added some more? And it always kind of relates back to that, 9 women cannot have a baby in a month sort of scenario that everyone's familiar with. So that's the challenge. And Chad's going to talk a bit about some of the realities that we've learned in how to try and overcome those challenges and achieve that scale and associated, as Bill noted earlier, not intended to be an evil term, governance, when you talk about consistent practice or the opportunity to really have metrics that you can roll up in that way. So real quick, I'll ask, are there any questions about either AgileCraft background, acquisition by Atlassian, or this topic more broadly before I allow Chad to get into some of those details? And if not, again, Mike thanks you and the team for the opportunity to present today, and I leave you in the capable hands of Chad Goodgion.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so we got about 200 more slides. and then no, I'm just kidding. Got a few things. So a few of the kind of secrets, if you will, that we've learned as we've worked with customers over the time. We've got kind of 5 key areas we commonly see. And then we'll spend a bulk of our time actually doing a live demo. So we'll go through some kind of ways that we help you visualize and connect that enterprise, and then leave a little bit of a open area at the end. Should be like, hey, can it do this or can it do that? And kind of deviate a little bit from a scripted plan to more of an ad hoc plan, if you will. So, but as we kind of go through this, as I mentioned, we really see a bunch of common themes around kind of scaling and enterprise and where organizations struggle. One thing we see is, teams are really optimized for that local execution, right? They want to go do their thing, they want to go sprint away, but then they don't really always think in terms of how do we tie this all together. And as Gene Kim in the DevOps handbook mentions, they left to their own devices, teams will always optimize for local execution, right? But system optimization is something that we should all aspire to, right? How does it all connect to that broader picture? How do we come together as a team to deliver against strategic priorities of the organization? As we kind of think through this, we think of it in terms of, how are we seeing, setting the vision across that organization, right? Each one of these teams has their own unique responsibilities, their own backlog of items to deliver against, right? But we got to really set a vision and start really getting that buy-in from every level, right? Kind of similar to what you're seeing in this picture. It's going to take a systems approach. So as we look at these jets here flying in formation, each one of these jets operates independently, right? Their cockpit, their pilots within that cockpit have their own kind of set of responsibilities to keep their plane going. But as they come together with this full formation here, there's certain aspects that they have to do to maintain formation to complete that broader mission. So we kind of look at that in a very similar way when we talk about, team level execution and how it rolls up to that program, to the portfolio that's meeting to that strategic goal, really creating that connected enterprise. Secret number 2 is you kind of have to know when to hold them and fold them, right? Does anybody play Texas Hold'em here? Yeah. So we got a little bit of, Kenny Rogers. Jeff, it's your turn on the song part of that. Kind of familiarize everybody? Right. No, you're good. No, nobody wants to hear that, believe me. But we see kind of common things within an organization as they start thinking about, transforming that. Even some of the simplest things become very difficult decisions across the organization, right? We think about it in terms of, how do you talk about semantics, right? How do you use common terminology? So we're going to kind of play a game, and we'll ask you, do you think we should hold them or fold them? So if we're going to hold them, that's like, hey, we should derive an enterprise approach. Hold them, let each team kind of locally decide that, right? And so, when we think of semantics, do we think it's, important to kind of use common terminology so that way if, a organization is using the term, for instance, within working in a safe framework, right? An epic is that thing above a feature or a Jira epic or an initiative. Do you think it's okay for different organizations to kind of call things different items? So one part of the organization says epic at that parent of a Jira epic or a feature, and then somebody else calls it an initiative? Is this something we should standardize on, or you think it's okay to have kind of different terminology throughout? I agree. So as you kind of see, as we think through this, we really feel that landing on a common set of terminology is very important, right? So we really think you should hold them, right? So a good compromise is when we talk about that terms of that in Jira, that Jira epic, right? That parent of a story. How does that translate? So we call it like in terms of using something like Jira Align. Maybe we compromise on features and then put in parentheses like Jira Epic. But we really think it's important to standardize, and that's really just around, you spend a lot of meetings kind of doing a data definition session all the time, should you not have some common terminology. So that is something that we see organizations really need to support some form of standardization, so a apple is an apple when we're having a conversation. Second thing is around kind of sprints, right? So all sprints should start on a Tuesday. So if we have 25, 30, 40 teams, do we feel like every team should always start on Tuesday so we have that exact same cadence? Is that something we should hold them or fold them on? And man, it's quite a crowd. Hold them or fold them? Fold them? Why is that? Yeah, no, absolutely. That's kind of one where it's, as long as we're operating and planning. Yeah, so he was saying that, it's something we should definitely fold them. and that's just the benefits of allowing that team a little bit of that flexibility from a planning start dates outweighs kind of that more rigid, everybody should start on Tuesday and operate exactly the same way. And we agree, right? I mean, that's one thing that as long as you have some sort of common planning cadence together and you're working loosely around kind of a similar quarter, that's definitely an area to where we think that local optimization at that team level should be flexible. And then last, around scoping, right? Your 3 isn't the same as my 3. First bonus question, anybody know who this guy is? No? No one? So this is Leonardo Bonacci, so Fibonacci. Yeah. So obviously, those of you familiar, Fibonacci is a sizing mechanism used in a lot of, in the Scrum world. But do we think we should all kind of standardize on a 3 equals a 3, regardless of the teams? Or do you think that each team kind of has the ability to define what a 3 from a relative size standpoint is?
You kind of have to standardize because if you don't, management will be the standard.
Anybody else agree with that approach? Okay, well, so we maybe differ in that opinion just a little bit. We kind of believe in more of when we're talking about scaling Agile, that law of large numbers, right? We think that as your sample size grows, your mean kind of adjusts and really starts allowing for that kind of variance with a 3 being a 3. One of the other reasons behind that is there's a lot of different factors that would drive a relative size at that team level. Maybe the complexity of the software they're working on is different. Maybe each team just sizes things differently. So we kind of do believe that there's allowing some flexibility there is okay, because just due to that law of large numbers. So secret 3 is, we think from a scaling Agile standpoint, I think, we find that we see a lot of organizations either try to grow it from a top down or a bottoms up. We don't believe, one way or the other works without having a little bit of buy-in from both sides, right? So you kind of have to have a top down and a bottoms up kind of meet in the middle type mentality. When you start kind of taking that top down approach where you don't have buy-in at that team level, it starts feeling much more like a command and control environment, right? You've got a lot of resistance at the team level. The teams are thinking, oh, this is just adding extra overhead, extra work that we don't want to do. And so you just, you struggle with that buy-in. But on the flip side, if it's more of that grassroots approach, your leadership starts thinking, well, we're kind of losing control, right? We don't have any visibility of how this sprint over sprint execution is tying into our strategy. So, they feel like they have limited visibility. They don't understand the investments. So, we really think having kind of that meet in the middle approach where your strategies, goals, and priorities are coming down from the top and then meeting in the middle kind of at that program layer against that team execution. So you can start getting that predictability and that spin and those results and kind of tying that all together. And that's where we see that intersection kind of in the middle there at that program level, where you start seeing that intersection of your product, your portfolio, and your dev teams. That's kind of that sweet spot where you commonly can hear that potentially as a little bit of the frozen middle, if you will. So as the teams, as you get buy-in at that executive level, you've got this grassroots movement. How do you come together to really make these 3 circles intersect? So, a lot around, how do you make this happen, right? What's the process? Well, there's a groundswell somewhere in every organization, right? You've got some leaders within the development organization that have aspirational goals to move towards a more agile way of doing things. But one thing that's really important is the culture, right? I would argue the culture is the most important thing. We had a conversation around this last night as well at dinner, and you got to make it a safe place to fail, right? You're not going to have it perfectly dialed in. You're going to miss sizing on things. You're going to say, well, that feels like it's about this big, but either it turns out to be this big. And that's okay, because as long as you're adapting, inspecting and adapting and learning, that's okay. And then you have to all come together to kind of solve those common problems. The way we really see this, and this will be, the next slide's going to show some dependencies, but how do you track dependencies across organizations, right? And we'll get into this in the demo and show a live version of this, but you got to have a way to visualize, track, and kind of collaborate when it comes to the dependencies. So as teams are delivering, portions of functionality, they're going to need other things from other teams. So how do you really visualize that and track that? So secret 4 is many teams just don't want to scale, right? They like operating in their own kind of little bubble. They like that local optimization. And they really don't have a desire to they feel like, that rolling that up is going to lose that. It's the fear of transparency, right? They fear that the leadership's going to come down on them because then they're going to start micromanaging them and start comparing them from team to team. But, it's not always about kind of teaching the teams to do Agile, right? It's about selling the vision of the organization. Really feeling like, top to bottom that we're an innovative enterprise. And we're going to achieve this enterprise agility. It's going to help us with our competitiveness. It's going to help us, succeed across the entire organization. So really setting that vision. And then by painting this vision, it really allows the development teams to know why their work is important, right? What are we doing sprint over sprint, story delivery after story delivery? How does it tie into the overall strategy of the organization? And it really just starts shifting the conversation across the organization around, instead of delivering in terms of how many stories we completed, it's talking about outcomes that we're delivering that helps drive the business. So this is a quote that during the AgileCraft days that we were sitting with a CTO of a large bank, and this is a quote that came out of his mouth. So do you know what we're building right now? We kind of, a lot of the folks were like, well, I'm sure we can make some guesses, but it's like, well, that's good because we don't, right? Neither do we. We don't know what we're building because we don't have that strategic alignment. And then the next thing right out of his mouth, because he has this complete loss of transparency, he's like, do you know why we're building it? And, once again, we're kind of like, well, maybe, I don't know. And he's like, well, because someone 5 years ago who's no longer here thought it was a great idea, right? So, how do we really show that we can have transparency and alignment throughout an organization if we don't have some way to kind of connect that team execution to these strategic priorities of the organization? So once again, I'll show this a little bit greater detail during the demo, but this is just the way, you can start visualizing that work. So you'll have, your why. We have the ability to start really creating that work hierarchy and getting that full visualization around execution. So, transparency, accountability, and structure, it's scary to teams, right? They feel like there's going to be negative consequences that come out of that. So it's really important to find the right metrics, right? It's not about you delivered 20 points, this team delivered 40 points, so they're twice as good as you. No, it's a way to visualize and help understand and kind of really think in terms of the overarching kind of business outcomes that we're delivering. And I'll just quickly skip through that because we're going to actually show that as well. But, and then kind of getting to the last secret so we can get over to the live demo is really, knowledge must flow kind of seamlessly across the organization to scale. So what you're seeing here is, this is what we commonly see in organizations, right? It's a bunch of these disparate systems kind of operating independently with no way to really tie it all together. So you've got at your enterprise and portfolio level some sort of PPM solutions, spreadsheets, PowerPoints, where they're tracking a lot of their strategic priorities. At that product level, they may still be working in a PowerPoint or some sort of roadmap tool. And then at the program level, you've got, a different set of spreadsheets, right? And then at the team, you probably have some sort of team tools, so your Jiras and your different team tools that are out there that the teams are managing that sprint execution in. But there's no way to really tie it all together. It's not updated in one source, so therefore, trying to get a real picture of the world, to get an understanding of where we are, becomes seemingly difficult and very labor intensive. So that's kind of where Jira Align, we were purpose built to kind of support and solve for this particular problem, right? So, we were built for scale. We were federated. We really shift to be more outcome driven. So at those different levels of scale, from enterprise to portfolios to solutions, programs, and teams, we like to sit on top of that, and we like to really bring together those three circles in the middle around the product management, the strategic portfolio, and the scale development. And then from there, we're going to be able to sit on top. So this is kind of representing, all the different ways that we help enable those teams. So what framework are you trying to support? Should it be a homegrown? Should it be a SAFe? Should it be a Spotify? How do we enable that process and give you that way to track and support your process that you're using to execute? We also integrate with your Jira team tool. So we give you that bi-directional synchronization. So as teams are executing within Jira, we're going to pick up those changes, and then we're going to roll it all the way up to that strategic level. And then we support, the ability to, support your DevOps and different add-ons as well. So, really just, we feel in order to effectively scale, it's vital to be able to connect that enterprise. And so from here, we'll kind of jump over and actually go into a live demo. But are there any questions before I jump out and jump into the product itself? No? All right. Let me grab a drink. And has everybody, or is anybody not familiar with AgileCraft or Jira Align? Have everybody heard of Jira Align before? No? All right, good deal. All right, let's mirror my desktop here. I'm a fairly new Mac user. Is there a quick command something for somebody that's a Mac user to just mirror my desktop? Mac users? No? Man, no help in the audience. I'm just trying to mirror. There it is. Perfect, thank you. I'm about 2 months into my Mac experience, so obviously that's why we brought you along here. All right, blow this up. So we'll quickly just do kind of a orientation, and then we'll really kind of structure this demo in the sense of, from a portfolio leadership team or a strategy office, where do I go in to really start setting that overarching vision of the organization, and then kind of work our way down to, as we start executing and start planning on a quarterly basis, how do we tie that together and start start visualizing that work to see it kind of execution and then rolling up to that strategy. So when you first come in, this is Jira Align. Most of your basic navigational elements are going to be located over here in the left navigation. You'll notice, and you'll hear me reference, three kind of time dimensions, or 3 dimensions, if you will, of the way we structure the data. All right. I'll be using the concept of people, work, and time. So we use a 3 different tree hierarchy to kind of support in the structure of the data versus kind of a singular tree that you see in a lot of different platforms out there. But initially we've got our people hierarchy. So starting at that enterprise level, working our way down to portfolios, solutions, programs, and teams. Within each one of these kind of levels of the hierarchy, we've got a different set of functionality that's located within here. So as a member of the Chief Strategy Office as a portfolio leadership team, obviously the functions that I perform in here are going to be much different than, say, somebody more at that execution layer, at that program layer, right, a program manager. So this is a very flexible configuration that allows for the ability to kind of customize what users can see based upon the level of scale that they're focused in on. So if I'm a portfolio leadership team member, I may see these 2 menu structures up here, but I may not see the program and the team because that's just not the part of the organization that I work in or deliver against. As we kind of go through and just navigate real quick, across the top here is what we call our global filter or configuration bar. What this acts as is a global filter throughout your experience within Jira Align. So it's going to be initially allow you the ability to start filtering across that people hierarchy. So as you can see, we've got a couple of portfolios in here. We've got a digital services and legacy apps. Let me make that a little bigger. So within each one of those particular portfolios, then you can see we've got a subset of programs or team of teams or agile release trains, depending upon if you're following any of those frameworks that are out there. But we've got AI, blockchain, mobile, and web. And then with each one of these programs, then you can see all the Scrum teams that we have executing. So we've got Baltimore, Cowboys, Houston, Tiger, and Washington. So each one of these Scrum teams are actually operating and executing their different sprints within Jira, right? So each one of their boards is connected. As they work on that board, start closing out their stories and tasks each sprint, we actually capture that data and bidirectionally sync it over to give you that roll-up visibility to start really seeing that connected enterprise. We built in a lot of enablement within Jira Align. So, we really want to meet organizations kind of where they are. So if you're let's do it. How's that looking? Is that better? All right, perfect. So kind of by way of the enablement, we understand that organizations are, as they're transforming, people are new to ways of working. We don't want to make it difficult to kind of get in and function within a platform, right? So we've added what we call checklist, and initially it's the training simulation. So, as somebody comes out of be it a leading safe type training, or be it just whatever internal training class, and they go into Jira Align like, well, I learned a bunch of stuff of how we're supposed to operate, but I don't really remember where to go within Jira Align. This gives you that series of training simulations. As you select one, you're like, oh, I need to go, as a product manager, I need to do some product road mapping. Ability to really follow a scripted checklist, if you will, of activities and videos. So this is going to be video based. And then as you watch the video, it's going to provide you with some, nothing like some live demo challenges here. All right. It's going to be video based, and then as you watch the video, then it'll give you a series of kind of click-based training activities as well. You can also create your own series of checklists. So let's say you want to, as you prepare for some sort of big room planning or quarterly planning activities, you want everybody to plan in a very similar way. You can create your own series of steps, embed your own videos as part of your transformation office to kind of support those different activities. I'm actually going to use one I created today, just to keep me on track and kind of keep us flowing through here. So as we think of the different levels of scale, starting at the enterprise, working our way down to the teams, we have this concept of a room in each one of these levels. Think of the room as the centralized dashboard, the place you go to perform activities as it pertains to that respective level of scale. So initially, when we think of that strategy room, we're thinking about our portfolio leadership or our strategy office. This is where we're going to go in, and we're going to start, really creating the vision of the entire organization. So when I go into my particular strategy room here, okay, I'm going to say, for what period of time am I setting my strategy? So you can see here, we're looking at a snapshot of time of 2019. So the corporate strategy 2019, and I am going to actually minimize that just a little bit. And so as we start thinking about 2019, this is where I can come in and really start building out my strategy pyramid. So you can notice here we've got our strategy pyramid for 2019. We're going to go in, we're going to set our mission, vision, and values. From there, we're going to start really defining what are those long-term goals that we're focused in on for 2019, right? So think of that as those North Star items for 2019, that very top of the funnel, if you will, right? So you can see we've got exploit emerging trends, expand to new and underserved markets, recruit and retain top talent, and then maintain and improve fiscal positioning. So those are kind of the North Star, the big picture, 2019, this is where we're really focused as an organization. As I continue to break these things down into smaller, more achievable goals, you can see here I go from my long-term goals to where I can start really refining those down into my yearly goals, down into quarterly goals and monthly goals. One thing to note about this particular pyramid is this is very flexible. So let's say, for instance, you don't have yearly to quarterly to monthly. You really just plan in terms of more of a long term and then go straight into, hey, here's our key themes that we're focused in on. I can actually remove these layers. So it's very flexible in that sense to kind of support the different layers of a hierarchy that you would need. So as I take my long-term goals and I start refining those down into themes, I can go in and actually start really managing the backlog of these particular items. So as you can see here, I'm looking at, of my 4 long-term goals, we broke those down into 15 themes. So here's 15 key areas that we're focused in on, a little bit more actionable items than those long-term goals. So we've got operationalize AI, all the way down to micro-lending in emerging markets. This is a drag and drop type backlog, so as you can start prioritizing your items, you can start dragging those up and down. But as I go in, so for user experience, for instance, I can go in and I can start really getting more specific around how are we going to execute against this theme, right? So what are my programs or my Agile release trains that are executing against this particular theme? What quarters are we focused in, or what program increments are we plan to deliver this work? I can start setting a high-level budget. So for this particular user experience, we're planning to spend, or we're budgeting $5 million for this particular theme. As I start refining these themes down into more of those initiatives, think of the initiatives as kind of that big bucket of work that's going to be executed over a number of quarters. I can start getting a visualization around, at the current level of refinement and planning, how are we trending against that $5 million budget? So as I go into, sorry, got a little slowdown here. So as I set my $5 million budget at that user experience level, Now you can see here's all the children initiatives that are going to help us execute against that theme. While we haven't got them all refined down to the appropriate level to define our budgets, our lean business cases, but you can see based upon its current level of portfolio intake, we're coming in at a total budget of 11.6, so we're already trending way high, right? So obviously our budget is a little bit of a miss there. So, it's just a way to start visualizing from a planning standpoint of how we're trending from a budgetary standpoint. So as we continue to break this work down, we're going to go back over to the strategy room. So as we break this work down, we take our themes into our initiatives and we start defining, okay, for this particular snapshot, it's going to be 4 quarters. Right below this, your initiatives will then start getting refined down into your Jira epics, right? So your Jira epics and your stories where all that execution is happening in Jira. So at this level, all these items are created and maintained within Jira Align, and then from here down is where we actually sit on top of Jira and we have that bi-directional synchronization with Jira. So as teams are working sprint over sprint, delivering stories and tasks that roll up into those Jira epics, that's where that synchronization point happens between the two platforms. So this enterprise platform sits on top of that. And so as we go through and we think from that strategy office standpoint, great, we've started intaking work, we've started planning work, teams are now executing. How do I visualize this work? How can I see all the work that they're doing and see that tied back into my strategic items? So within the work tree, we have a couple of different ways to kind of view the data. First, I'm going to switch this back over to what we call our strategy view. And so within the strategy view, we're going to once again choose that same time period, right? We're going to look at our corporate strategy for 2019. So what is our plan for 2019? Now let's look at it with that execution lens. So these should look familiar to you. We've got our 4 long-term goals in here: expand to new underserved markets down to recruit and retain top talent. I can get a high-level readout here of how we're doing and progressing at that initiative, epic, and story level. I can actually drill in and start really seeing the data as it flows throughout the hierarchy. So as I expand, improve, and maintain and improve fiscal positioning, now I can see all the different themes, the children themes that are part of this goal, right? So, okay, we've got user experience down to our tech stack update. And then as I go into a particular theme, now I can start seeing all the children initiatives, and I can drill down all the way down into all those different epics and stories that are being executed within Jira. So as the teams are in Jira, working on their sprints, closing out and accepting stories, our connector will pick up that change in a bi-directional synchronization, and you'll see kind of an uptick in progress here as things are accepted within Jira. So it's that really creating that connected enterprise, giving you that full visualization of how the execution ties into the strategy. Any questions thus far? All right. And so one thing I wanted to quickly note within the different work items within Jira Align is this Y button. So you'll notice the Y button here, and this particular button is present on all the work items within Jira Align. And what it does is when I select it, it gives me the slide out, and it gives me a readout of the strategic nature of the work and why it's important to the organization. So it starts giving me information around the score of this particular initiative, the parent theme that it's a part of, the ranking of that theme. If I'm using some sort of weighted shortest job first, it will give me a readout of that. It's going to give me a readout of my success measurements and my business case. But it's just really, the strategic nature of the work and why it's important. And the reason I highlight this is we're actually taking this information and we are we're pushing it down to Jira so that way it's presented to the teams. So as the teams are working sprint over sprint, it's easy after you get about 10 to 20 sprints in to lose sight a little bit of why your work's important because it's very much a foot on the gas mentality, right? You get done on Wednesday, you start planning on Thursday. So this is just a way for us to really connect them to the strategy of the organization to help them really have a better understanding of why the work that they're doing or maybe priority shift, why that's important to the organization and why these things might have shifted as well. So really keeping that transparency to them as well. All right. So as we think about, okay, this is great from a strategy standpoint, this is kind of that point where we'll shift a little bit and we'll start moving to, okay, well, I see how we can start really connecting the enterprise, defining our strategy, seeing how it breaks down into a logical work hierarchy, and kind of getting that level of visibility. But as we start shifting from an execution model, how do we start really visualizing that at that center, right, at that program layer where we had those 3 circles that interact? we can actually shift this, and we can go for more of a, hey, show me the same report, but build it from that story level up. So as my teams start planning execution, and as they start delivering within their sprints, build it from my stories to my epics all the way up to my initiatives. So you can see here we have this concept of a program increment. So that's going to be loosely based around a quarter, right? So a quarterly planning bucket, if you will. So we can see we have PI5. You'll notice that initially we're going to get a high-level readout of PI5. We've got 13 days left. We're going to get a readout around progress at that initiative, epic, and story level. I'm going to go ahead and actually move this up, and I'm going to say, well, I want to look at this more for my entire digital services portfolio instead of a single release train. So as I move this filter up, I can expand this information and say, okay, that's great. Yeah, 13 days left. Maybe we're looking okay on the tab where, in our last sprint, maybe we're looking okay from a story task. Probably not looking very good on the epic progress, right? We're not accepting epics, or we got too much whip, but I can start drilling in and getting detailed information around kind of what these dials are telling me. So you can see here now for digital services, I can look at all my 4 different programs in here, and I can say, okay, for mobile, here's a high-level readout of how they're progressing in this particular quarter. But then I can start really drilling into the underlying work that's making up these numbers. So I can start saying, okay, for all the different initiatives, here's the initiatives, and drill all the way down that stack to say, okay, here's the particular initiative, here's all the particular features underneath that, or the epics underneath that, and the stories that are happening and being executed within Jira. So it's just a way to really start visualizing where you are. As I go into a story, let me see if I have one that has a particular set of tasks underneath them. I can go all the way down to the task level. All that data from Jira, that task and story level data, is getting replicated within Jira Align, so it gives you that opportunity to see even all the way down to the task level without going into Jira as well. All right. So let me pull up one particular work item here real quick. And so from here, as we start thinking about, visualizing the work, understanding how the strategy and execution are linking, kind of want to shift and think about, how do we intake work from a lean portfolio management standpoint, right? So, how do we think in terms of lean budgeting? How do we think in terms of just visualizing a workflow to say, okay, are we working on the most important things? Has this been vetted appropriately, and so forth? So you'll notice within a particular initiative, we've got, on the details tab here, we've got a common set of information you capture at that story level, right? Descriptions to states to sizing type things. But we do also give you that ability to start really defining what we call development steps. So as you think about how the initiatives flow through your system from a intake to a delivery standpoint, you can define this series of steps. So you can see here we've got funnel, reviewing, analyzing, portfolio backlog, implementing, and done. What we can do is we can actually start monitoring these things and visualizing these things, so we can start seeing how the work is flowing through each one of these steps. We can start getting cycle time about this, and really just getting that full concept of, how do you get from concept to cash, right? That full lean cycle time. But also as we think about intake, how do we start capturing details to assure that we're working on the most important information, or the most valuable things to the organization? So we support creation of a lean business case, right? So as we come into the initiative, you can start setting up your lean business case. You start defining all the details around that. You can add custom fields to start capturing key data points that you need to decision upon this. You can start really tracking it from a funding stage. Is it defined to business case to funded? And you can start identifying approvers, right? Who needs to approve this particular work before it can go to that next stage. We also give you that ability to really start tracking value, all right? So what you're seeing here is a value scorecard based upon high-level ROI. But what this is actually a customized scorecard that you can create to capture these key value data points that you need to decision upon this work. But for this particular example, we've got a high-level ROI scorecard. It's looking at cost, profit potential, time to market, and development risk. Each one gives you the ability to select low, medium, or high. And as I select these different values, it's going to drive a different weighted score based upon that selection. So as I selected low, you see that move to 100. And then it's going to give me an aggregate count over here of the value of this particular initiative. So as I see this, total value score, I can go in and actually analyze. And what this does is this takes a look at all the candidate initiatives that are in our pipeline, right? And it gives me a readout of the value as it pertains to all these different initiatives that are in flight in our LPM process. So this really helps kind of move the needle and drive a different level of conversation in your organization around, hey, is this work the most valuable work versus kind of, I'm sure you've all experienced scenarios where people have passion projects and it quickly elevates into a loudest voice in the room type scenario. Well, this drives a different level of conversation around that, right? Well, you're saying this is so important, but based upon this other thing's more important. So if we're having to make a decision around one or two of what's the most valuable, it gives us a different data point to make those decisions. Question? Yes, sir.
I don't know if you were.
I hear you.
I don't know if you were ready for a question or not.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. Jump in. Yeah.
Poor Chris sitting next to me has heard this so many times. Tell me about the balance between strategic initiatives, or I'm not going to use the I word, strategic things and tactical things. When you assign a value score to something, value based on what? From whom? Like, there are things that might not impact the bottom line this quarter, but if we don't do them in the next 2 years, we don't have a quarter after that.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? And does this help surface that?
So one thing I'll note again, so this is definitely a customizable form. So each organization will define the different key metrics we're measuring from a value. But yeah, I mean, that's spot on, right? If it's something that's more of a keep the lights on value, you can potentially add that as a component here within the scorecard to drive, to be a factor in the overall value score. Or there's other ways also, like in the details tab, we have a lot of different fields to where we can kind of capture, we'll call it the strategic initiative word that you mentioned there, right? To ways to kind of capture this as a more of a, keep the lights on versus a strategic growth opportunity versus other things of that nature. So there's plenty of ways to capture that, but within the value kind of concept, I would say it would still be a driving force that's going to drive some sort of weighted decision point, because it's a factor, regardless if it's only a third or a fifth of, if you're looking at over 5 different vectors, it's still a driving factor. So as we define what that looks like organizationally as part of our portfolio intake process, we would want to build that out within this value score, I would think.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so as we think and we talk about kind of value delivery, value engineering, pivot and persevere, right, to assure that, we always go in with a list of assumptions, right? We think this initiative is going to achieve this type of value, but as we release it into the marketplace, at what point do we come back and measure it? Maybe it's more of a tranche funding model, right? We're going to deliver some key features, and we're going to test it in the marketplace and decide, should we keep investing here? So we support that ability to really start tracking that via our value engineering model here. So within value engineering, we have that ability to really start defining, okay, based upon this artificial intelligence for improved call center interactions, we can start hypothesizing around what we think this is going to give us from a value standpoint. So you can see in this example, we're looking at across NPS that it's going to give us a 15-point increase of NPS, right? So as I start defining my hypothesis, defining we'll be successful if we achieve a score of 15 NPS, and here's where we're starting, I can start really tracking this value as we deliver incremental functionality and measuring it in the marketplace to get those feedbacks. So I can start really tracking and really getting into that ability to start looking at pivot and persevere type options, right? So as we start delivering the value, I can come in via the REST API or manually update the value at that point in time around these current NPS scores to see, based upon the effort we're putting in and the value we're receiving, should we continue to invest in this? Should we persevere? Or we totally missed the mark, our assumptions were totally off, we should just pivot, quit investing, and move forward with something else that's more valuable to the organization. And then since we kind of started with the finance at that theme level, then the finance tab is going to give you that ability to start allocating your budgets, as you get down the hierarchy, right? So from your themes to your initiatives to your features, what does that look like from a budget allocation standpoint? So as we kind of think in terms of bringing work in, the LPM process, that's where we'd really transition and think about the roadmap, right? So as a portfolio or a product management team, and I want to start visualizing my work and start really communicating the strategic intent around the vision of when I would hope for the teams to kind of deliver this particular work. Our roadmap's going to give you that ability to kind of start visualizing that across many different many different work item types, different quarters. So I'm going to go ahead and move this up and take a look at the mobile program, for instance. So, initially that roadmap is going to be that mechanism to really start communicating strategic intent that should inform how we prioritize our backlog, right, at that product level. So what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at a single team of teams, or ART, if you will, release train, a program of mobile. I'm looking at a single quarter. I'm taking a look at the different epics. So those, as we define our initiatives and break those down into epics, how would I like the teams to target kind of their focus, and how's this going to inform how I prioritize my backlog for this given quarter? I'm going to scale this back just a little bit, just to give me a little more landscape, and then I'll broaden it back in. But what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at all my particular epics that are planned for PI5, but I have them grouped. So we have this concept of a product. And so you've heard me talk about people, you've heard me talk about the work hierarchy, you've heard me talk about the time, so the quarters and the yearly snapshots. Well, the product attribute actually kind of cross-cuts all those different dimensions. And it gives you that reporting mechanism to say, okay, for a specific product, where's our focus area? So I'm looking at a grouping of products. I've got check scanning app, I've got mobile trading app, and some other items in here. But now I can start really planning my work based upon that product vector. So for my check scanning app, here is all the epic delivery as part of that. And I can start saying, okay, for PI5, here's sprint 23, 24, 25, and 26. One thing to note about these sprints, right, as we talked about, should all teams start on the same day? Should they have the same cadence, right? Well, so within Jira Align, we set up what we call these synchronization sprints as part of that program increment or that quarter. And what that is that's basically an aggregation sprint. So as you have all these 20, 30, 40, 50 teams in Jira executing on their own unique cadences, we actually give them a single kind of sprint 23 aggregation point. So our connector takes all the sprints on their boards and does a mapping to this single aggregation sprint. So even though each one of these 20, 30, 40 teams have their own unique sprint 23, we're consolidating that and aggregating that into a single sprint view within Jira Align. So as the teams go in and they start taking this list of epics from product, and they really start further refining those down into stories and making their plans around their story delivery at that sprint level, that's what these numbers are representing. So as they go into Jira, they start planning that story delivery within Jira. Then we're going to give you an aggregated view to see, okay, now that this was originally my strategic intent, how's my actual plan at that story level coming together? So it's going to give me that opportunity to start verifying, well, are we on plan, or do we have maybe some misses? Like you'll notice this one story that's out here outside of that. So, as a product manager, I can visualize and say, for this particular feature, this G12 hardcore automation, it looks like we're doing okay, but we have one story that's kind of lingering outside of the sprint that I was hoping they could complete this by. So I can either go and have a conversation at the team level, be like, hey, is there any way I can change my priority on some of the stories to make sure we get this finished? Or I have to go reset different expectations of the leadership team, right? I was saying that this epic was going to be done by sprint 23. However, based upon the team's available velocity, they're not going to be able to finish it until then, so I'm going to have to drag this. So it's going to be drag and drop. So as you can change things, you can start really setting your vision. The colors are going to represent, kind of subjective health ratings, right? So let's say from an execution standpoint, we look okay. But maybe we just, one of our architects just left, and we don't have another set of core expertise there, right? I can go in and say, hey, well, based upon him turning in his notice today, this is at risk because he's leaving and we don't have anybody to pick up the rest of that work. So it's just a way to kind of set some subjective health rankings as well. And so as we think about, okay, this is our strategic intent, I can kind of start visualizing how it's coming together with the plan at that team level. That's where we kind of go in and think about our strategic backlog. Our roadmap informs that strategic backlog. So I'll go ahead and make this a little larger again. So within our strategic backlog, it's a multi-tiered backlog, right? So as you can look at all the different levels of the work hierarchy, you can see we've got themes, initiatives, capabilities, epics, stories, and defects. Based upon the level of scale that I'm focused in on, I'm going to look at whatever level is appropriate for that. But right now, we're looking at the epic backlog. I can go in and say, okay, for this one individual program, the mobile program, and for this quarter, they have 59 items in the backlog planned. So as I expand this is going to be similar to many list kind of views in a backlog, right? Drag and drop functionality, right click, abilities to move. Also, we can actually add additional columns and really use that as a first pass of sorting. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to add a column at this level to say, show me, I'll just go with an easy one, weighted shortest job first, even though maybe we're not operating in a safe manner, but for purposes of the demo, I can go in and actually use this as kind of that first pass and that of, hey, let's rank the backlog based upon this, and then we can make some adjustments based upon other factors besides just that particular prioritization mechanism. And so as I think about more of that planning my backlog, prioritizing my backlog, I can go over here in my Kanban view, and as we talked about our LPM process, it's that lean portfolio management, as we start taking work in and we start defining our different workflows, I can actually utilize this to start visualizing how the work is flowing, right? So really focused in on the flow through the whole enterprise. So now you can see for this particular mobile program for this quarter, I'm looking at my initiative backlog, and now you can see I've got a lot of different work flowing through the system, so I can start seeing where my work's coming from a funnel to reviewing to analyzing. I can set exit criteria at each one of these states too, right? So, in order for it potentially to move from analyzing to portfolio backlog, I can, I don't have any defined right now in this particular instance, but this would have some exit criteria here. So it's going to give me that ability to start really visualizing how the work's moving, and then I can start tracking my different cycle times at each one of these particular states, right? So how long was it been in analyzing? How long has it been in the full value stream? So it's going to help me identify any potential bottlenecks. Maybe I have too much WIP, but really just looking at a way to visualize that full concept to cache. Another way within our backlog to kind of help with a planning standpoint of, it's always, as organizations are planning at that highest level, how do we really know if we're loading the team up to be successful? It's a lot of times it's a little bit of this, like that feels about right. Maybe we totally missed, maybe we didn't, but within this particular view, I can go in and I can really start loading my teams up based upon their average velocity. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of quarters here, a couple of more, I should say. And so now I'm going to start looking across 3 quarters, and I'm going to really start kind of visualizing and planning my work accordingly. So I'm looking at my Epic backlog again. So if you remember, this mobile program was part of the digital services portfolio, right? So that was made up of 4 different Agile release trains or programs. And so you can see here, at the top here, I've got this load bar. And you can see that, based upon this load, this is looking at the full portfolio and telling me that on average over the last 2 quarters, this particular digital services portfolio has delivered a little over 5,000 story points. So that's their velocity as a whole. And we have them loaded up about 63% of that. So not looking too bad, right? That's probably, if you think in terms of kind of 80%, 50%, 30%, 20% if you're thinking about over 4 quarters. This is not a bad plan. It allows for a little bit of flexibility should new work enter the system. But if I go down and look at my mobile program, you can see that their particular program load, they have a red bar here. So they're definitely overloaded because on average they only deliver about 1,800 points of that total 5,000 that we saw before over the last 2 quarters. So we have them loaded up to 2,590. So more than likely they're going to have some problems, right? We're probably not going to be able to achieve. So it's going to give me that ability to really start loading up based upon my available velocity for each quarter to assure that we can deliver against those most valuable items based upon the current dynamics of that static team at a velocity level. But I can also go in and say, well, we really need to get through this entire list here. What if we added a few more Scrum teams that allowed us to push our velocity up? I can go in and kind of do some what-if scenarios around, hey, if we could add enough teams to get us up to 2,600, would we be able to get through all this? And now you've noticed that bar's turned green. So it just gives us that way to really start load balancing the team to assure that, based upon their velocity, they can deliver the most valuable work to the organization. Any questions there? All right. And so, don't know everybody's respective kind of roles in the enterprise here, but are a lot of you familiar with kind of the concept of a program board? So as you go in and start planning kind of quarterly delivery, do you build some sort of kind of high-level board on the wall looking at kind of epic delivery and that type of stuff? Ish. Aspirational, maybe? Yeah. All right, well, I'll go in and I'll kind of show you our electronic version of the program board. So as organizations are going in typically and using some type of big room planning or quarterly planning type activities. Your teams are going to, generally come together and plan, when they expect to finish their portion of an epic. So I'm going to go ahead and narrow this back down to a single quarter. And so the program board is kind of that virtual plan as it pertains to a program increment or a quarter. So once again, we're looking at the mobile program. You can see that we've got our different Scrum teams. So we've got Baltimore, Cowboys, Houston, and Tiger, and Washington. So as these teams are executing within Jira on their boards, all their data points are kind of flowing back. What's represented here is a combination of objectives. Come on. Objectives at the top here. Your plus signs represent dependencies, which I'll cover off on in just a second. And then your rectangles represent your features. The different states are going to be driven off kind of that linkage between the execution that's happening in Jira, right? So, as we start planning work, should something change to impact our plan? So let's say, for instance, this particular feature, some of the stories move past this sprint 26. That's going to cause a color change based upon that kind of shift in priorities down in Jira. So it gives me that way to visualize as a program manager, hey, we potentially have a problem here that I need to go address to see if I can kind of help get us back on track. As you hover over different items, you're going to notice the relationships there, right? So as you see here, I've got that in Sprint 26, that top Baltimore is working on this particular epic, but so is the Cowboys team. So you can see that it's highlighting them both to show you that, hey, there's a relationship there between the particular work items being displayed. Within Jira Align, we treat our dependencies a lot different than you have seen probably in a lot of different systems. It's a much more robust artifact than just a simple linkage between two work items. The dependency model within Jira Align represents a commitment and a handshake between teams. So as I go into a particular dependency, you'll see that as the requesting team of Cowboys, I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, as the Cowboys team, here's a particular epic that I'm working on. But I cannot deliver this epic because I have a dependency. So I'm going to define what I need from a dependency standpoint. I'm going to go in and define a need by date. So you can see I need this by September 11th. And then I'm going to say what team I'm dependent upon, Baltimore. And so as I select the Baltimore team, the system's going to pick up the product owner and the Scrum Master. And it's going to, then a workflow engine is going to take over and send an email to the product owner and the Scrum Master for the Baltimore team to say, hey, the Cowboys team has a dependency on your team. So as a product owner, Scrum Master of the Baltimore team, then from there, I'm going to come in, I'm going to review the dependency, and then I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to say, okay, I can give this to you by Sprint 26, or if I can't give it to you by the need by date, then I can say I can propose a different date, right? I can propose a different commit date. Then that same workflow engine is going to pick that up and handle that collaboration between these two teams and getting to that committed state. Once I land on a committed state, then as a member of the Baltimore team, I can come in and actually define the stories from my backlog that are going to fulfill this dependency. So it's creating that linkage around, this story and this epic are impacted by this dependency. So should something happen and this story gets prioritized later than the commit date, then that's based upon that real-time connectivity with Jira. As soon as that story moves out that breaks the commit date, the items on this particular program board are going to turn red. So it'll be a near real-time connection, and it's going to say this is red. So as a program manager or a release train engineer or product manager, if I come in the morning and I can see that something changed from the day before and turned red, I know exactly where I need to focus, that morning to say, okay, what can I do to help get this back on track? So it's really allowing me to focus in on the areas that need my attention based upon that exception of the color change. Does that make sense? In addition to this program board, we have a lot of different ways to kind of visualize and utilize different reporting around our dependency model. So as I go into the dependencies here, I can go out and say, show me a wheel view. So if I want to look at, just a holistic kind of snapshot of all the dependencies as it pertains to my mobile program for this quarter, you can see here now, all the teams with dependencies are represented on the outside of the wheel. All the lines represent dependencies. So you can see this one's kind of a mess. We got a lot of risk here, right, for this particular quarter. As I go in and I actually select one of these teams, that wheel will shift. And over here in the right panel, it's going to load up information around work that others need from the Cowboys. So it's going to give me a list of all the different dependencies. and then work that the Cowboys need from others. So it's just a mechanism to kind of help provide me some analytics around this. But then one other I wanted to highlight on the dependency maps is the grid view. So the grid view is going to be kind of represented in more of that spreadsheet format, right? So all your requesting teams are going to be located here in the left. All your need by teams are going to be located across the top. What this is going to do is this is going to give you an aggregated count between teams of all the dependencies as it pertains to PI5. So you notice Baltimore and Cowboys here, they have 3 dependencies. But let's say, for instance, that number was higher, right? Let's say it was an 8 or a 10. Well, obviously at the program leadership level, that's a lot of risk, probably coming out of a quarterly planning between those 2 teams. So I may decide to kind of set up some additional synchronization points between these teams just to try to de-scope the risk as much as I can to make sure we stay aligned. But if I'm seeing the same information quarter over quarter, it gives me kind of that opportunity to make different decisions around how do I restructure potentially the team membership of these to assure that I reduce the risk by maybe making them a little more cross-functional, right? I take some of that core expertise from Baltimore and the Cowboys and I kind of flip some of that team membership so that way I can come in and allow them to be more cross-functional and deliver all their work without having to have this high number of dependencies. So it's just a mechanism to help as we transform and get better over time to kind of make different decisions. How are we doing on time? 11? Mike, remind me, 11:15? Is that more? Okay. All right. So, as we've talked about dependencies in the program board and we talked about our strategy room, one room I wanted to quickly highlight too was more at that program level, right? How do we get that lens across that program level kind of focused on the quarter? So as I go into my program room, this is going to be kind of that centralized dashboard as it pertains to all things for a single program for a single quarter. So as I go in, you'll notice I'm looking at the mobile program, I'm looking at PI5. Each one of these is going to have a different set of cards. When you first initially log in, they'll be in the right, but I can start really dragging and dropping my different cards here to kind of get them in the order that makes sense to me, right? The things I want to see most be at the top of the page. But what it is it's just going to give me a high-level readout of how we're doing at that quarter, give me all the information as it pertains to my different teams that are working in Jira. So your Baltimore to Cowboys all the way down to your Washington, right? So as they're executing in Jira, it's that aggregation point in that centralized dashboard and roll-up of that execution that's happening in Jira. And so, one thing to note, come on, checklist. So as we think about in terms of kind of that centralized dashboard lens and just how do we track overall, how do we understand kind of the progress and really focus in on the right metrics, right? So within our PI progress report, this gives you kind of a different lens based upon your audience. So think about it at the highest level of maybe I want to do just some high-level reporting around progress of an entire program, give them a burn down at that epic and story level from Jira. Maybe I want to talk about burn-ups, right? Maybe we're never finishing all our work and we can start visualizing, well, my gosh, we're adding a lot of scope kind of mid-cycle. Of course we're not going to be successful, right? We didn't plan accordingly. But I can actually drill into these. And so as I'm looking across, I'm going to go ahead and pull this out to a full portfolio. As I'm looking across the entire digital services portfolio, I can start getting some trending around, how we're doing not only at the entire portfolio level, but with the lens around each individual program. So now you can see, okay, I've drilled in. I've got my 4 programs of AI, blockchain, mobile, and web. And then for each one of these, I can start really drilling in to say, okay, let me see each individual Scrum team, or let me see at the initiative level of what they're working on. But I can drill all the way down and say, okay, well, they're looking like they're running behind. Is the whole program suffering, or is it just a couple of teams maybe they're falling behind? So I can just start getting that visualization from a burn down or burn up standpoint. And you'll notice that all these particular charts are exportable. So if you're creating some sort of status reporting outside of a system, it gives you that ability just to go right in and grab that information and put it in those different status reports that you may be doing. And so, as we kind of think about, okay, we've talked about, how do we plan at the highest level? How do we really start breaking that down into prioritizing our backlog to planning against the load? And now we kind of shift into full execution model. How do we start really seeing the trends, right, over time, tracking our dependencies, tracking our burn-ups and burn-downs? But how does that tie back, right? So when we start talking about lean budgeting, how do we really start getting that visualization around, we set a budget. Now that we've seen our work being broke down, how are we trending against that budget? And then as we start accepting work, how do we start seeing that roll up? So our investment versus actual report is going to take a lens of that highest level. So if you think about, we had our long-term goals that got broken down into our themes. So now you can get a lens around, okay, for these particular themes, how are we doing from a financial standpoint? So you'll notice we've got our 12 themes here that are part of this particular snapshot. We've set a budget of $37.5 million. I can start getting a readout in a pie chart of kind of percent allocation around the budget. As teams start estimating work, so they start taking these themes, breaking them down into their initiatives, their epics, and their stories. Within Jira Align, there's an algorithm that'll go in and based upon either a blended rate or a cost center rate, it'll take a look at the team dynamics from a daily burn rate, sprint length, and allocation to the team, and it's going to actually run this algorithm to get to a cost per story point. And so as teams start estimating, it's going to use that algorithm to start giving you kind of some visualization around the roll-up. So based upon its current level of refinement, how are we trending? So you'll notice here for user experience, we are budgeting 10%. As we start estimating the work, we're coming in significantly higher, right? So it's going to give me some decisions around, well, this is the number one thing we're focused in on. We're going to probably have to allocate budget from another place to assure that we can deliver about that. But then as we start accepting the stories, you're kind of going to get on that flip side. As we accept the stories, we're going to start getting that actual roll-up using that same algorithm. So now you can see, we're still trending from an estimate and actual about the same, but we're still way over the original budgeted item. So it's just going to give us a way to start kind of visualizing the spend as well. But I can go down another layer and say, okay, well, that's great at the highest level, but I really want to look at this more at that initiative level, right? I want to just kind of do some status reporting across our different initiatives. So I go in. Within my particular status reports, I can choose to look at this a multitude of ways, but I'm just going to go in and look at the same mobile program again. So as I select my mobile program, it's going to load up all the different initiatives that the mobile team is working on. I'm going to be able to look at this with two lenses, more of a work execution lens and then more of a financial lens. Right now we're looking at the financial lens. So you can see it'll give me a list of all the different initiatives the teams are working on. I can get a readout around kind of the parent themes if we've defined start and target dates. Yes, sir.
Hey, Chad, sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to go back for a second to the themes that you were talking about.
Right here?
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between themes and value streams in the organization? How are they the same thing, or is your value stream going to represent a series of different themes within it? What is that relationship there?
Yeah. Generally, your value streams will work across the themes. Your themes could potentially bypass multiple value streams, and that's more of that, solution concept. I'm going to deliver across an entire solution. But I'd say your value streams are kind of that model of how we deliver value to the organization, which could be cross-cutting across multiple themes. I mean, it's really, I'll even call it almost unique to different organizations, exactly the way they set that up. But yeah, I think on the most common, kind of by the book, that's how the vision would really model out a little bit. So as we go in, if you're doing kind of bi-weekly, weekly status reporting, this gives you that ability to kind of start taking a look at that work with the budget lens initially, right? So you can set statuses about kind of red, yellow, greens, like even though you may be doing Agile, you still can't get away from the old way of kind of mapping status, right? As we go across, if we're starting to track more detailed information from that finance tab, that would populate here. But I can also flip this over and say, well, let's look at it from more of a work execution lens, right? So I can really look at it more that work status. So the same status remains, right? But I can start seeing the rank. I can start seeing the different states, the values. I can start setting subjective health here around the budget, the people, the quality. I can start capturing notes and reasons. So that way, week over week or every 2 weeks when we meet to kind of go through this different status reporting, I can start really seeing those notes and getting a better understanding. I can drill into specific line items here and say, okay, well, give me more information. So for this initiative, give me all the details about it. So for artificial intelligence, now I can get a little more of a card view around if we've set any kind of phase gate dates, if you will, at those different process steps. I can define those and see those. I can start seeing all the children epics, any kind of objectives that this is attached to, and so forth. So it's just a way to kind of bring it all together to give you that full visualization from a status reporting standpoint as well. And so I think at this point that was kind of thinking about how do you plan at the strategy level, how do you start tracking that strategy as teams are executing, and then how do you kind of shift from a quarterly execution and really start planning and tracking that, and then kind of bringing it all together to see how is our spend going from a lean budgeting standpoint. Those were kind of the primary areas that I wanted to cover today. Like I said, I'm pretty open to if there's kind of more, well, what about this or what about that we can kind of deviate here. So I'll open it up to any questions or additional items that you may like to see. I'm sure.
This looks incredibly powerful. More of an open-ended question. This clearly needs an organization to understand how this works, the value of it. Like, there's got to be, use the word again, this cultural buy-in. So as powerful as the tool clearly is, what do the conversations look like when you're like, okay, now you have to work this way? What does it take to get an organization to get it?
We see it a few different ways. Obviously, if an organization has decided, hey, we're adopting this particular framework, like say we're going all in on SAFe, right? We really try to partner ourselves closely with the transformation office that's rolling that out, and really do more of a, we'll call it land and expand, right? Let's find that key program and expand. It's never a big bang, like whole organization now is all in, right? It's more of a strategic, focused way of rolling this out. For those organizations that are maybe using some sort of hybrid model or what have you, I think we have a solutions architects that as we engage with customers, they're actually embedded at the first part of this to kind of be that liaison on the ground around, help me understand your process, let's move forward, let's design the flows, and then let's work together to implement the software to support your process. So they're kind of there to help, not really fully coach, but they do a little bit of coaching to help guide those organizations that maybe don't quite have the full vision defined.
Yeah, there's an old saying in software development that, any developer worth his or her salt can write C in any programming language. And what I would be concerned about here is with all of the power and visibility and all the knobs and switches that you've got available to you here, people could just use a tool like this to keep doing things the same old way they always did, or try really hard to. And that seems like it would utterly miss the value this could offer to them. So along those lines, more specific question. We're trying to fill in that gap between, Agile at the individual team level, and then the things we're trying to accomplish here at the enterprise, the organizational level. There were several places during your walkthrough here where it almost sounded like we were doing the reverse of what I would expect from a pure Agile point of view, where it's like, okay, we have planned for this thing to take this number of months or a quarter or whatever. So now a team or multiple teams have to go in and estimate the amount of work that's going to be required, write the stories around this particular piece. I would have expected it to go the other way. So what I mean by that is, if you have to accomplish X, Y, and Z, it seems like the way to do that is to ask the people who have to build X, Y, and Z, what's this going to take? How long is this going to take? As opposed to, hey, X, Y, and Z has to be delivered by December. Well, let me know what it's going to take. Let me know your schedule between now and December. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. Obviously, when you think in terms of lean portfolio management and lean budgeting, there's a lot of waste if we built themes to initiatives all the way down to the story just to get some sort of real dialed-in accurate way. So, a lot of times there's going to be, it's part of that inspect and adapt cycle, right? So you're going to have some swag, we'll call it, right, at those higher levels that you're going to always inspect and adapt to refine your sizing mechanisms to assure that we're getting better incrementally over time. We may totally miss the mark initially when we're new to this. And so the inspect and adapt is going to be very important in those scenarios to where we start dialing in, even at that highest level, that, this roughly looks like about 30 team weeks, right? But it's critical at each one of those layers of scale that you have key representation. So let's say, more of that enterprise architect. that understands high level the impacted applications, that can give some sort of rough estimate around that, and then as it works down, it refines. So that's kind of where from that estimate to, or the budget to the estimate to the actual is where you start getting those readouts as well. So it's just always still a constant, we don't want to go through and, build out our plan all the way, because what if priorities change? Then that's all wasted time, wasted effort, wasted value. So it's just really that whole swag around kind of figuring it out and dialing it in and refining it over time at the different respective levels with the appropriate representation that can speak intelligently enough at that point in time to get some sort of big number against it.
Yeah, now you can see why I started this line of questioning with the whole organizational
Yep.
buy-in,
Yep.
because it definitely requires, at least in my experience, that transformation, that organizational mindset
Yeah.
shift in order to make this actually work. Steve said he had a follow-up as well.
And I'll say, just to add on to that a little bit, we clearly have customers that are strongly utilizing the portfolio. But initially, a lot of times we go in and it's just, give me a better way to plan out my quarterly delivery. And we want to grow to here, but we really need you to dial in here in that middle area, and then we'll expand up. So it definitely kind of works both ways a lot of times.
All right, Chad. So yeah, this is Steve again. I want to kind of take this conversation we're having right now and actually bring it back to the idea of governance as a whole. So a lot of times when we talk about governance or even look at a tool like this, we make the mistake of thinking that we are trying to build a platform to see into what is happening from the top, executives and things like that. And of course, this tool does a fantastic job of that. But what I believe is one of the biggest success stories for governance and sustainability for governance, and I'm going to talk about this later on in my session, is the grassroots, which is the user, not just the user buy-in, but the user participation in the governance process, so that the momentum that we're building in the good governance is coming from the bottom as well as from the top. So in the history that you guys have been working on with the Align product, are there some specific stories that maybe you have of how this tool was able to foster that user-based excitement about what it was doing here, maybe by tying the visibility that this tool provides to, say, the inspect and adapt process or the program process or something like that? I didn't know if you guys had any specific stories around that.
Yeah, so one of our most successful implementations is definitely around a Fortune 10 telecom company. They had kind of churned through trying to do enterprise-wide agility for years, right? Invested plenty of dollars with limited results. And then so we made a decision to kind of help, they made a decision to go full safe, and they utilized Jira Align or AgileCraft at the time to help support that, right? And so really coming in and working closely with their teams. We were down at that point in time, we were a standalone entity of Atlassian, so we were, not an entity, we were a standalone company. And so we had kind of that all the way team level down. So we actually worked kind of top to bottom, right? We helped the transformation office, but we were down kind of working with those individual teams to help them identify better ways to visualize, report, and give them that way to start rolling up and communicating at that executive level, which was very critical to them, because before it was more of a, you guys got to go deliver this and figure out how you deliver it, versus an intelligent conversation around capacity and load, right? And so, the other thing that came out of this as a result was better planning, better visualization, to where we saw their quality improve greatly. I don't have the metrics in the slide, but I believe, I think it was, after a couple of quarters, we saw 30 to 40% decrease in defects, so better quality. We were able to get the teams all operating in a single system that provided them the ability to utilize like meetings, right? Planning, poker, retrospectives together collaboratively within the software too, creating that better collaboration points from a team room to a program room as well. So, I think that's probably one of the most successful from just tying it all together from, teams doing their own thing out in potentially these different systems to bring in a way to collaborate at all levels and still kind of supporting their ability to, accurately commit to things as well.
I had one last question, and then we'll break for lunch.
Yeah.
And I'll give some of the logistics around that. But when you look at this at Align, one of the things is we've talked to our clients and worked through the product and through a project and worked on one of the large pillars of the organization you just talked about.
Yes.
What is the minimum? What is the minimum size? So you have a large organizational
Right.
hierarchy. At what point is the lowest point in the organization that you can really do this? Because obviously you can do it if it comes from the C-suite.
Right.
You can push it all the way down. You can do it at the probably the sub-organization or the pillar or the that level,
Portfolio-ish, yeah.
division level. How far down can you go all the way to a product level and have this be successful, or where does it stop being successful and you have to say, wait, I need more buy-in than this before we can go down this path?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we're designed for more of a larger organization standpoint, right? So talk about more of if you think in terms of like a release train, like 125 people. So somewhere kind of there and up is kind of the sweet spot. As far as, does it make sense to just come in straight at that program level? We commonly see that as an entry point because they're just not ready at those higher levels of that portfolio or division layer. The product layer is something that, each organization has a unique way of how they deliver from a product standpoint. Sometimes the product is the pillar, if you will, right? And so we can structure the platform from a hierarchy standpoint to support that. But I think, it's really just more of that kind of one program or group of Agile teams that are north of 125 is kind of the sweet spot. Anything outside of that is generally it's too robust, right? They're just not quite ready for something quite that big. So that's where more of like portfolio comes into play and things of that nature as well. All right. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.